Welcome back to Torah on the Go. I usually begin these episodes with the assumption that you are walking your dog or on the Peloton, you're taking a break from work. Today, I'm going to begin with the assumption that there are many of us who are not staying in our homes, that we're evacuated. And there's a little bit of a different tone to this episode. With a tremendous sense of irony, the episode that was intended to be released today was supposed to be the episode on the burning bush, on the narrative of Moses finding God amidst the fire. And we wanted to jump in and preempt that episode with this one here. We understand what's happening in our community, and we have been exhaustively trying to reach out and take care and provide and comfort and do everything we can as the rabbis of Valley Beth Shalom community and as colleagues of so many who are suffering during this time.
Right. And it's been devastating. It's absolutely devastating. Losing a home, even being evacuated from a home. We're not evacuated, but we're on the edge, so we're packed. And that's devastating. The question of what do you take and what do you leave behind, and what would it mean to leave behind a place where children have grown up and memories are encoded in the walls and the doors and the wall and the floors and the ceilings. It's been very difficult, and we really understand the anguish that so many are going through.
We have spoken to so many of you, and we understand the angst and the pain and the trauma, and we thought that we would learn a little bit today, because the question we hear being answered by many of our, let's say, cousins in other faith traditions is, why are these fires occurring? And Judaism usually responds differently. But I don't want to discredit the source from which they're drawing, because it's the same source that we use, and it's actually the book of Exodus in many ways. So I have a collection here today of 4 different references, images of fire in the Torah. The first one being from the book of Genesis, V'hinei tanur ashan v'lapid esh, during Abraham's covenant. They call it the covenant of the pieces. There's this reference that there was a smoky furnace and a torch of fire that led him through this path between the parts. Exodus chapter 3, verse 2, V'hinei v'hasne bo'er ba'esh v'hasne enenu ukal. This is the burning bush scene. The bush was burning in fire, but the bush was not consumed. Exodus 9, verse 24, the 7th plague, Vayihi barad ve'esh mitlakachat betocha barad. There was hail and fire flaming, and the hail and the fire were interlocked in a way that the world had never seen before. V'har, and the last one is Exodus 19, Revelation at Mount Sinai. V'har Sinai ashan kulo mipnei asher yarad alav Adonai ba'esh. Mount Sinai was smoking because God descended upon the mountain in fire. Mm-hmm. Why do you think fire is used so often in the Torah, so often in Scripture, as a symbol that the divine is in our presence?
That's a wonderful question. Let me ask you a question. Why is fire so engaging? When you go on a camping trip, you build a campfire. Right. You can sit around a campfire for hours and hours just staring at the fire. When there's a romantic moment with your wife, it's by candlelight. We begin Shabbos with candlelight. Right. Fire attracts us. It attracts our attention. It's fascinating because it's not exactly clear what it is. It's real, and yet it's not tangible. It brings us light and warmth. It can be so important for us to change. It gives us control over our environment. We're not condemned to sit in the dark nor in the cold, and yet at the same time, it can be so horribly destructive, as we've seen this past week. It's such an interesting thing, right. And what exactly it is isn't exactly evident to us. It's not clear to us, and yet it's very real. And in some ways, that's a wonderful symbol of the divine. We can feel its heat and its light without getting too close. You can't get too close. It can hurt you. It can be destructive as well as constructive. And its essence completely escapes us.
There's a power there's a power in fire that we
Sure.
recognize from the earliest age.
Yeah.
And like you said, if we get too close, we get burned.
Right.
And if you stand too far away, you feel like you're no longer in relationship. People get close to the candles on Shabbat for
Right.
these reasons, the Havdalah
Right.
candle. At the same time, the rabbis never point, the tradition of rabbinic thought is to never point to natural disaster and say, the fires in the Palisades is somehow the presence of the Lord.
No.
We would never, ever hear rabbis say such things. And so how do we explain the transformation from the scriptural imagery of fire and our usage of fire in all of our ritual in all of our ritual lives to what we see today, which is, mass destruction?
Because it was a metaphor. It was a symbol of something which is hard to describe. It was impossible to describe. It's a symbol of divinity. We use symbols of divinity all the time because you can't capture divinity in a definition. God has a name that can't be pronounced. But fire becomes such a engaging metaphor for divinity. It's not divinity itself. That's number one. And number two, to go to the deepest question you've asked, which is, there are places in our tradition and in other traditions that call for divine punishment. And we'll see a tragedy, a disaster, as a divine punishment. But we resist that. Even the Bible resists that. There's a whole book called Job. There's numbers of Psalms where people say, this can't be divine punishment. It's simply not just. It's not fair. What's going on around the community now is there are all these conspiracy theories because the idea that this was just random, that it was accidental, that it just happened, evades our need for order. We want to assign a meaning to this. So it was caused by this politician or this conspiracy or this faction. I even heard someone blame it on us, blame it on Israel,
That's right.
blame it on the Jews, blame it on property developers, blame it on the We need to bring order to something because we just can't live with the randomness. So if you look at the fire and you say, well, God bring this fire. No, that's disgusting. There's something obscene in that so many families would have lost so much of their own lives, of their lives, that so many firefighters would put their lives on the line to push it back and to assign that meaning to it. No, that's not the way it works.
So we were talking yesterday in our offices about how a natural disaster of this magnitude brings out the highest level of humanity and the lowest level of humanity all at once. And people glom onto the lowest level of humanity. And so all of us receive text messages with images of arsonists or looters or whoever it is that's trying to capitalize on this moment. But the highest level of humanity, the first responders, so many in our community that have opened up their homes to take in neighbors.
Right.
So many of our community who have taken our kids to the fire stations, like we have personally ourselves, taken our kids to Station 83 to hand over water or Gatorade or power bars or whatever it is to help support the efforts. When people want to know where is God in the scenario, and I'm going to use one of these literative tools again, God is in the spark in the goodness of humanity. God is the force that prompts us to get up in the morning and drive with our kids to the fire station and try to bring them what they need, to call all of our loved ones and offer them our homes, to know that this isn't going to be over for a long time and that we're going to have to be generous and hospitable, and we're going to have to carry with us a sense and purpose of godliness for a long time to come in order to heal the greater community.
So there is another fire reference which you didn't bring, so I'll suggest it. In the book of Kings is a story of Elijah. And Elijah is fighting against the idolatry of Queen Jezebel and King Ahab, and he's losing. So he takes off to the desert to gain some spiritual direction. And he ends up, of all places, on Mount Sinai. And the story in the book of Kings is that he was in a cave and God said, come on outside. And he stood at the edge of the cave, and first came a wind, and then came an earthquake, and then came a fire. And the language of the Bible is, and God was not there, not in that fire. That is, all of these natural disasters, these natural phenomena, which so shake us and so bring us to a sense of awe, God's not necessarily there. And then the last line is kol damama daka, which is sometimes translated as a still small voice, but it's deeper than that. Kol means the sound of, dama is silence, daka means delicate. The delicate silence, that's where he finds God's place, God's voice. And here, too, I would suggest the same thing to those who see God in the fire. God's not in the fire. God's in the tiny voice that drives a firefighter to stand in the face of that conflagration, with an axe in one hand and a hose in the other, to stand between us and that evil and put his or her body on the line, his or her well-being on the line to fight that destruction back. And in all the first responders, the medical people and the technicians and the pilots of these planes, these crazy planes dropping water, and in all the people in the neighborhoods, simple acts of kindness. I think what was most moving were these stories where a fellow was carrying his father-in-law who was disabled out of the house and couldn't get to the car. Neighbors came and took them to safety. It's just so many acts of selfless goodness. Kol damama daka. That's where God is found.
And so the Jewish tradition prompts us to action. It prompts us to action through this still delicate voice that I would argue is basically a compass inside of all of us. Mm-hmm. It's our moral compass that points us in the right direction and says to us, we have to be there for each other. That's how we find God in the fire. Not in the fire, but in our response to the fire.
Right. It's in the help that we offer each other.
If you're listening to this and there is something that Valley Beth Shalom can do for you, or if there is some resource that we can provide for you, please reach out and be in touch. Send us an email at info@vbs.org. Please reach out to the clergy. Our intention is to be here for the entire community to help drive people towards the resources that they need, to help comfort families, children who are scared, adults, parents who are scared. We've been living with our suitcases at the front door for now a week, and it's not a normal way to live.
Right. The great Rabbi Fred Rogers of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood was once, who happened to be a Presbyterian minister before he became a television star, was once asked, what do I say to my child in a moment of crisis? I think it was 9/11, and he was on the air, and he looked into the camera and said, look to the helpers. Look at the people who are there to protect us. Look at the people who are there to carry us and support us. Look to the people who share this, the community that shares with. Don't try to carry this alone. If you have children and your children are watching this on TV and they're frightened, talk to them. Don't let them carry it alone. And if you feel that way, don't carry it alone. Come talk to us. We have rabbis, we have cantors, we have teachers, we have counselors. There's a community here that will support you. And as you're sitting late at night and you hear the helicopters going over, instead of being frightened, think of the guys in the cockpit of that helicopter who are putting their lives on the line to protect us. Fred Rogers was right. Look to the helpers. That kind of inspiration can give us strength to get through.
At Valley Beth Shalom, we have a counseling center.
Good one.
And a good one. And the counseling center is going to begin launching groups to help discuss the kind of trauma. So whether or not you've been, your house is burned down, whether or not you've been evacuated, or whether this experience has just left you with a great deal of anxiety. There are people in our community who are there to hear you and to work through this episode with you. In so many ways, it feels like the world is on fire right now, and we have to rely on the goodness of humanity in order to restore us.
And if you'd like to help, the Jewish Federation has set up a wildfire fund, and they're very reputable in the way they distribute funds. Of course, the Red Cross is there. I would caution people, just listening to the news reports, be careful about sort of new startup charities, because some of these, unfortunately, are frauds and scams. But there are some wonderful ways to give. There are some organizations collecting clothing. There are organizations collecting children's toys. There are organizations collecting toiletries for people that are really displaced. And then as this goes on, this isn't going to end. The fires will be put out, thank God, soon. But it's going to be a tremendous process of rebuilding, and there'll be more help needed. So if you'd like to give, it feels really good to give and to be part of that team of the healers in this terrible situation.
We look forward to welcoming you to the team of healers. If there's anything that you need, please reach out to us at Valley Beth Shalom. And thank you for taking even the briefest moment out of this hectic time in all of our lives to learn Torah and to reflect on God's role in all of this.